Through the lens of time, I can now see how much my family's words and actions shaped my journey in ways that I couldn't fully grasp until now. There are moments when I realize that my family has known me better than I ever thought possible. Their words weren't just advice, they were predictions of my future, my struggles, and my triumphs. The more I learn about life, the more I realize that my family has always had a deep understanding of how the world works. I just needed to grow into the person who could see it too. Looking back, I see now that every word of advice from my family came from a place of deep understanding and love. They weren't just speaking, they were guiding me toward a life of greater wisdom. As life unfolds, I'm beginning to see that the lessons my family tried to teach me weren't just random thoughts. They were the keys to understanding the world around me. It's amazing how, as we get older, the lessons from our families start to make sense. They weren't just talking, they were preparing us for life in ways we could never fully appreciate until now. The people who know you best are often the ones who've seen you through every phase of your life. They understand things about you that no one else does, and their insights are priceless. I used to think I had to figure it all out on my own, but over time, I realized my family had already given me all the tools I needed to succeed. They were just waiting for me to see it. As I reflect on my family's teachings, I see now that they've always been ahead of me, offering wisdom from their own experiences. I just had to be ready to receive it. There's a quiet power in family. They may not always have the answers you want to hear, but they often have the answers you need to grow and succeed. The more I experience, the more I realize how right my family's advice was. It wasn't just about the here and now. It was about preparing me for a lifetime of challenges and opportunities. In the midst of every family conversation, I'm learning that there's so much more beneath the surface. My family's wisdom wasn't just practical, it was the roadmap for living a fulfilled life. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is listen to the people who love you the most, because they see your potential before you do. My family always knew what I was capable of, even when I doubted myself. Family is the first place we learn to navigate life, and as I get older, I realize just how much of their wisdom is a gift that I'll carry with me forever. The words of my family echo in my mind more than I ever realized. At the time, I didn't fully grasp their significance, but now I see that they were always right. What I once considered as outdated wisdom now feels like the foundation of everything I know. My family's teachings were timeless, and I'm finally starting to see just how deep their knowledge runs. It's funny how life has a way of making you realize the truth of your family's words, even when you were too stubborn to listen at first. Now their lessons are my guiding force. The older I get, the more I realize that the lessons my family gave me weren't just about survival. They were about thriving in a world that sometimes feels overwhelming. In the quiet moments of reflection, I realize that the wisdom I sought from others was already embedded in the teachings of my family. I just had to be ready to embrace it. It's a humbling experience to look back and realize that my family knew exactly what I needed, even when I couldn't see it for myself. What seemed like typical family advice now feels like invaluable guidance, shaping my decisions and helping me navigate the ups and downs of life. It's amazing how, as we grow older, we begin to see that our families weren't just speaking to us, they were speaking into our futures. Sometimes the best wisdom doesn't come from books or mentors, but from the family members who know you better than anyone else. The more I learn about life, the more I realize that my family's guidance was not only practical, but spiritual, preparing me for a life filled with purpose and growth. Looking back, I can see how my family's teachings were always ahead of their time. They weren't just giving advice, they were sharing the keys to a successful life. In every conversation with my family, there's always been more beneath the surface, more wisdom, more understanding, more love than I could fully grasp until now. The more I think about it, the more I realize that everything I needed to know about life was always there in the words and actions of my family. Sometimes we don't realize how deeply our family's wisdom is rooted in love until we face life's challenges. But when we do, we see that they were always preparing us for what's ahead. There's something remarkably profound in realizing that the very people who raised you often understand you in ways you never imagined. Their wisdom, though sometimes unspoken, is a mirror of all the experiences they've lived through, something you can only understand when you stop and truly listen. It's funny how the people who have always been in your life can surprise you. What you once saw as simple advice or old-fashioned thinking begins to sound like the deepest truths. Turns out they knew more than you ever thought. Sometimes it's not until you're faced with challenges of your own that you truly see how much your family's guidance was shaping your path. Their lessons were there all along, just waiting for the right moment to make sense. When we're young, we often think our families are stuck in the past, out of touch with the present. But as we grow, we start to realize that they've lived through more than we can comprehend, and their wisdom is timeless. You don't realize it in the moment, but your family's quiet observations and gentle nudges are often the most accurate compass in your life. It takes time to truly appreciate the depth of their understanding. We spend so much of our youth trying to distance ourselves from our families, only to realize as we grow older that they were always right. They had the answers before we even knew the questions. As the years pass, you begin to see the patterns in your family's advice, and suddenly everything they've said makes sense. Their lessons weren't just words, they were preparing you for a life you hadn't yet imagined. Sometimes, the people who know you best aren't your friends or colleagues, but the ones who have watched you grow from the beginning. They see things you can't, and sometimes their wisdom is the most valuable gift. It's not until you find yourself in their shoes that you realize the weight of your family's words. They weren't just teaching you, they were passing down the survival guide to life. What once seemed like unsolicited advice now feels like the most profound guidance. Turns out my family knew exactly what they were talking about, even when I didn't listen. The more I reflect, the more I realize that my family's love wasn't just about support, it was about preparing me for the world, even when I didn't understand how deeply they were shaping my destiny. There's an unspoken depth to the way families communicate their wisdom. It's not always about what's said, but what's understood, passed down silently from generation to generation. In the midst of every lesson, every piece of advice, my family was quietly shaping my future. At the time, I didn't see it, but now I realize just how right they were all along. The beauty of family is that even when they seem to be out of touch with the world, they hold the kind of wisdom that only comes with time. They know things you're not ready to hear, but eventually it all clicks. Sometimes you need to take a step back and realize that the answers you've been searching for were always there, waiting for you in the words of those who've always had your back. Family is where we learn the lessons that shape our lives, even when we're not paying attention. It's only when life gets complicated that you realize how much they've been preparing you for. What my family didn't say in words, they spoke in actions and in their silent support. Over time, I've come to realize how much I learned from their unspoken wisdom. The best kind of wisdom is the kind that is passed down with love. My family, without realizing it, taught me more about life than I could have ever learned and on my own. Sometimes, the most valuable lessons are the ones that come not from advice, but from witnessing your family's actions and understanding the deep, quiet strength they bring into every situation. Family is the first place we learn to navigate life. even when we're too young to understand the lessons being taught. As an adult, I've come to see how much more they knew about life than I ever gave them credit for. There's a beautiful irony in realizing that the ones who've been there for you from the start were often the ones who knew what you'd need most before you did. The older I get, the more I realize how much of my family's advice and guidance was like a roadmap to life, even though at the time I thought I knew better. It's humbling to look back and see how much my family saw in me before I could see it in myself. They knew my potential, my challenges, and my path even before I did. Sometimes the most profound truths are the ones we ignore the longest. My family was always there, pointing out things I couldn't see until life forced me to open my eyes. I used to think my family didn't understand me, but now I see that they were the ones who knew me best, even when I couldn't understand myself.